But right now I want to introduce the first speaker of the day, and that's Ron Murphy. Ron is one of the smartest guys I know, and I'm not joking. I honestly think that him and Nick are probably two of the smartest authors in this field, and I'm not kidding. They're just very, very intelligent men. And Ron, I believe, is a PhD in all kinds of stuff. I can't even, whatever. And I've really enjoyed my conversations with him, and I'm glad that he's here. And I hope that you guys will have as much fun at the conference as I'm having. And don't forget that this is going to go, there's a set time that's going to go, but if you guys are willing to stay later, we're going to have a panel, and different people are going to come up, and you can ask them their questions, and you can ask them questions and get their opinions on what they think this is. Because like Ken, there's a million different things that could be going on here with this phenomenon. One thing I want to say real quickly about what Ken has said about, now, this is going to sound weird, but like people say, well, it could be a Bigfoot. Getting the reports that I do and constantly opening up your email every day, I get reports of a Bigfoot Dogman hybrid. And there's a lot of conjecture and postulating about what the beast of the LBL is. And I've come to the conclusion that it could be something akin to a hybrid of some kind. As weird as that sounds, it's a very possible theory, and it's no more implausible than somebody turning into one. I mean, I started out believing that it was a physical flesh and blood creature that you could touch. And now I've kind of come to the conclusion that it is something supernatural. There are too many cases of these things doing things that are not natural. And I've even changed my stance to the point where this could be something beyond what we could imagine. And that sounds really, really weird, but that's me. I'm standing up here before you, and I'm telling you what I believe. So, without further ado, I want to bring Ron up here so he can start his presentation. Ron Murphy, everybody.
Can you hear me okay there? So good, right, okay. So my name is Ron Murphy. I'm from, yes?
I would just say right down the barrel.
Right down the barrel. Right down the barrel. See, I don't have my own rock band, so I don't know how to do this. But I do wear the hat, because you wouldn't believe what I said unless I had one of these hats on, isn't that right? So that's a instant street cred right there. I remember I was doing a conference, and on the panel with me was Lauren Coleman and Linda Godfrey, and she said she had to get out of the field because she didn't look good in the hat and she couldn't grow a beard. So there you go. So yeah, all these, you can hear a lot of great stories. I'm a fanboy of this as well too. Like whenever I first came here, I said, I cannot believe that I was invited to be a part of this, you know, because all these guys I watch on TV and everything, and then they said, you know, you go on at 9 o'clock in the morning. I thought, there's not going to be anybody here, you know, I'll probably be the donut guy or something. So I'd like everybody for coming out here and listening to what I have to say. So I've studied the literature throughout my life, and in graduate school, you know, I really focused on history. And what really kind of expanded my mind on the paranormal was all of the sites and all the historical relevance that things like vampires and Bigfoot and Dogman, werewolves come into play. So my little speech today will be about early Native American cultural expressions of the werewolf, and we'll kind of try to connect some dots and see what we come up with at the end. So first, I think that we need to identify what we're talking about. And the Dogman is a great sounding name. It's like Bigfoot and everything. But at the end of the day, I think, and even on the title of this presentation, is the idea of a werewolf, you know. What exactly is that? Because we immediately call Lon Chaney to mind and everything. But actually the werewolf, the word were is just an old English word meaning man. So we're talking about a man-wolf. And these creatures are said to have intelligence to them too. That's what can set them apart. They don't necessarily have to be a creature that transforms, but they are a cated creature that has intelligence, much like a human being, so they can interact with the world in a far different way than an instinctual animal can. There's also the idea of structuralism involved as well too. famous sociologist by the name of Levi-Strauss came up with that term, which simply means that if we have the civilized, we also have to have the uncivilized, the idea of man and animal, and this kind of straddles the line between the two. And the bestial side of nature as well too. A lot of times whenever I do talks on these kind of archetypical creatures like werewolves and vampires, usually at the end of the talk, it's almost like a Scooby-Doo episode. And whenever we take the mask off of the werewolf, there's a human being underneath there. Because we like to project things onto imaginary monsters because we don't want to admit that we are capable of some very heinous things, correct? Now this particular woodcut here is a rather famous one, and this is a woodcut of a werewolf. And you can see how, in the Middle Ages, how they defined what a werewolf was. And it was simply a person who imagined within his mind that he was a werewolf. And there you see him, you know, had killed a family and carrying a child off in his mouth. And, you know, one of the types of iconography that we have here as well, too, is to show that he's insane, that you have this disheveled hair and ripped clothing. So the idea that a person could become an animal has been with us from the very beginning, but there's usually some sort of, you know, illness associated with it. So the idea that a person can become an animal not necessarily means they have to transform, but they just take on the attributes of an animal. Now, the Adena culture is one of the cultures that we'll be looking at today. It was a pre-Columbian Native American culture that existed from about 500 to 1,000, and this is from the early woodland period. The Adena culture refers to what there was probably a number of related Native American societies sharing a burial complex and ceremonial system. So if anybody here is from Ohio, you have the Serpent Mound out there, which is a great effigy mound right there. And then you have anybody from Mississippi, there you go right there. And then how about, this is fun too, anybody here from Illinois? There you go, so you have Cahokia there, if you've ever visited that area. One of the most massive mound structures in the world, as a matter of fact, and surely the largest one in North America. It actually has a pyramid there that has a base that's larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza called Monk's Mound. But yes, so these are the kind of mound complexes that we're dealing with. The Adena culture was centered on the location of the modern state of Ohio, but also extended into areas of northern Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and parts of extreme western Pennsylvania. However, in my area of Pennsylvania, we have the remains of one mound left because back in the colonial days, they simply plowed over them to make room for farmland. But what is so interesting about these mounds is that oftentimes you have very well preserved burials within these mounds. And this particular culture had what is called the cult of the wolf. The Adena werewolf transformations involve serious anatomical modification to the human form. So most anthropologists assume that the burial was that of a shaman who in life could kind of go between this world of the human and the world of the animal. But what this culture did was they took the body after death, they removed parts of the face, parts of the jaw, parts of the teeth, in order to place a wolf skull over it. And then they would wrap the body in fur so you would have the burial of what appeared to be a werewolf. And in the academic literature, they called it a werewolf burial simply because that's what it appeared to be. As I said, they had to remove parts of the oral cavity, and the best example of this comes from the Ayers Mound in Kentucky. And that's what you have right there. So you see, you have the skull, and this wolf jaw was put over it, and probably part of the wolf's face as well too, but that didn't survive. But you can imagine somebody, being buried this way. It would look as if this person was in a state of not only transformation, but fully transformed into the animal. So you have to ask yourself, why do they do this? History doesn't exist in the vacuum. So why is all this kind of stuff going on? Well, the grave of the werewolf, this is burial number 2, was large, and it was of a man estimated between the ages of 25 and 30 years old. He had placed an extended position on his back in a bark-lined grave, And the special interest, as I said, was the lower jaw and facial bones had an association with the broken remains of an artifact made of a cut animal jaw. And there's the two researchers, Webb and Beatty, who have researched this. Now, what's interesting is this just didn't happen in one isolated case. There's physical evidence dating to the archaic and woodland periods that includes wolf skulls modified to fit human skulls, and human skulls modified with front teeth removed to accommodate wolf jaws. And as I said, they were wrapped in fur. So if this was one isolated case, you can understand that maybe this was a particular totem to this group. But it seems as if the early native population, this general area, had at least the idea that there was a wolf out there or a person out there who then either could assume the shape of a wolf, or there was something out there in their natural environment that they were trying to mimic or imitate. So we could talk about sympathetic magic. Sir James Frazer said this is like produces like. So the person was assuming the guise of a wolf to attain some of the attributes of a wolf. Very possible. There's a lot of similarity, and objects or actions resembling or symbolically associated with the event or person over which influence is sought. You know, a wolf is a powerful animal. In very many native populations, the wolf also meant intelligence. It represented family. It represented the idea of going between different worlds. So it's very possible that that's what these tribal customs were supposed to imitate. Or it could be imitative magic, which is magic based on the assumption that the desired result could be brought about or assured by mimicking. So in this particular approach, what we can see is somebody truly wanted to assume the likeness and the behavior of a wolf. And if that is the case, that's not the first time we saw this in history. And as I said before, this could also be the totem of a particular tribe as well too. And this is in the Pacific Northwest. This is a totem pole. And a totem is simply a natural object or animal that is believed by a particular society to have spiritual significance. And of course, the wolf is a powerful animal. It's a cunning animal. It hunts in packs. It communicates. And it's very much like who we are, right? It has a community of its own. Now, the Cherokee beliefs, and from North Carolina, tell their first ancestors being able to transform from men into wolves, but they believed that it was a genetic condition. They didn't use the word genetic condition, but it was believed that a person could only be a werewolf if they were born to at least one werewolf parent. So again, we have this idea, this notion, that even before Europeans came here with all their great werewolf lore, we had an indigenous idea of transformation possibilities into some sort of creature that straddled the line between wolf and man. The wolf of the Kachina and Hopi culture, we see that right there as well too. Again, it can represent a lot of different things: family, the idea of intelligence within the community, or it can also be hoping for a successful hunt, which we see as well. So becoming the beast. In the Navajo language, our word skinwalker translates to by means of it, or goes on all fours. The Navajo believe these were witches, and there's always a malevolency to it. There's nothing beneficial about a skinwalker. You know, it's not like, oh, you know what, we're having some problems within the village. Let's get a skinwalker in here. You know, that's never part of the equation. They're always something that's very, very, malevolent and vicious. So yeah, as I said, the Navajo word for wolf also means witch, and it is a person that could transform if he or she donned a wolf skin. Now the relevance in history, now of course this is North America, but if we would go back to the Middle Ages in Europe, this is the way the person transformed into a werewolf, right? They were given the belt that was made up of the fur of a wolf, and by putting that on, they assumed that it was going to make them, transform them into that particular creature. Now sometimes, the devil would meet somebody out in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night, and they would present them with this kind of, cursed type of belt. But one of the most famous cases is by somebody by the name of Peter Stumpf, who lived in Germany in the Middle Ages. There was a person by the name of Peter Stumpf, and this was about 1568. And he was known as the werewolf or the beast of Bedburg. and he went around killing people, believing that he was a werewolf. He would put on this belt made of a wolf skin, and he killed about 18 people. Whenever he could not find a person to kill, he would prey upon livestock, and he was known that he particularly liked to hunt women down who were pregnant so he could devour the fetus. So this is well, the relevance in history. We see this again. Two different cultures separated by time and space, but to have a similar idea as well. The Cherokee Indians have a warrior group that call themselves the Wolf Soldiers. They serve as a defensive and protective association. The warriors even went to the extent of wrapping themselves with wolfskin to seek the animal's strength and power. And again, we've seen this throughout history as well too, with the berserkers of the Vikings. But we know that people were putting on skins of animals and assuming those attributes of that animals from even the time of the Homeric period. So we know this goes back at least 3,000 years within our history. They were called the drinkers of blood because they would assume the association with the animal so much that they would become that animal and consume their enemies. And one great Viking word, the Ulfner, the warriors wearing the wolves of the skin of wolves were called the wolf coats. And I do believe that a lot of our European myths and legends and folklore come from our involvement with these wolfmen, which would seem to be werewolves to anybody coming into your village. You can imagine you're a little town in England someplace, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night, people come into your village dressed like wolves. I truly believe that these kind of interactions probably prompted a lot of our werewolf mythos. Now, the wolves are also seen as the bringers of death. They are pack hunters, they are scavengers, and they are creatures of the liminal zone, which means they exist right outside of our civilization. They live in the shadows, right? And the howl of the wolf is very evocative, but it's also very frightening as well too. But another point I want to point out is scavengers. Now, this is where it comes into play again when we talk about burial mounds. Wolves will be opportunistic in ways to gather food, and they will also be known to dig up graves. So it's very possible that the idea of wolves being seen in digging up Indian graves that were placed in burial mounds led to this association with the wolf as the bringer of death. And one other culture, folks, have we ever seen that this wolf is also the bringer of the death, or the conveyor of death? And we see that very strongly in the Egyptian culture with Anubis. And we do know that there was a type of wolf there that was seen in the areas where the burials were held. And it's easier to assume that, or easier to believe that wolf was carrying your ancestor into the afterlife rather than scavenging off the body, right? So I think that's the way that we kind of make these little fantasies within our minds. But the thing when we talked about how the transformation occurred by wearing the skins of a wolf, well, that also happened with Anubis. And one of the ways to do that is with a piece of fur called the Inuit. And I'm not a linguist or anything like that, but the word Anubis comes to us from translation after translation to it finally gets into the English of Anubis. But back in the day, back during the Egyptian period, the Inuit is probably very close to the way Anubis would have been pronounced, or would have been called. So it seems as if Anubis and this piece of belt was one and the same. So there was no differentiating between the two of them. It was an animal skin fetish, which means it had a magical power to it. This Inuit allowed communion and communication with the gods. And by the priest using this, they would become mediators between our world and the other world as well. And that's not the only wolf god that we see in Egypt either. Wopawet was an ancient wolf god whose worship originated in Upper Egypt. He was one of the earliest of the gods, worshipped in Abydos, which was where the dead were buried. His city was called Lycopolis, which is the Greco-Roman period, and that word means the city of the wolf. And he was said to open doors. He was a funerary deity and a psychopompus, which means he conveyed souls from this world into the next world, which is also very prominent in a lot of Native American cultures as well. So as I said, he can also be seen as a spirit guide as well. These are also tutelary spirits, which is a protective spirit or deity, a guardian, patron, protector of a particular area. And a lot of people I've interviewed whenever they've had encounters with Dogman are often in areas where there are still pristine burial mounds. And I think even Linda Godfrey will talk about this as well. That there's these creatures are often seen in areas that are sacred to a particular Native American tribe. And it seems that there's almost a protective spirit there as well too. And we talk about protective spirits in the guise of a dog and the guise of a wolf. That can also be seen in other parts of the world as well too. The church room is a guardian spirit from English and Scandinavian folklore who protected churchyards from thieves, vandals, witches, warlocks, and even the devil himself. And the grim most often takes the form of a very large black dog. Now, where the church grim originated, maybe back in the pagan societies, that would often take a dog and sacrifice it and bury it in a particular area, hoping that that form, that spirit form, would protect that particular area. So again, you know, we're crossing timelines here, we're crossing oceans. There's this similarity that extends with the idea of this protective dog, this werewolf, and in very many instances, this Dogman as well too. Now, when we talk about wolves and burial mounds, Wisconsin has the most burial mounds of any state, about 15,000 mounds. And Elkhorn, Wisconsin, is surrounded by effigy mounds. And we talk about like epicenters for Dogmen. Well, this might be one of the reasons. And I have to tell you, you know, when we talk about the area of land between the lakes, you know, from a paranormal point of view, is it possible that whenever they create this particular area, that they submerge some sacred sites, which would be the first time something like this happened? So it's possible that one of the reasons why this Dogman is seen here, if this is indeed a tutelary spirit or protecting these Native American lands, is it possible that there's something, you know, buried underneath those waters that this creature is still lingering around for? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my little dog and pony show. That's all the time that I have. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, you can ask them now. You can come up to the table or anything like that. But does anybody have anything to talk about, anything like that? Guys, you've been awesome. I can't believe everybody showed up for this. I'm glad you guys are just as crazy as I am. Thank you so much.